Marvel Ultimate Alliance released in a different time. You know, nowadays everything is superheroes. There's TV shows, there's movies. The MCU is absolutely ginormous. But back when Marvel Ultimate Alliance came out, things were, you know, a bit different. See, back then, the only way of really interacting with like 95% of the superheroes in the world were through comics or the odd cartoon. And in Ireland, comic books were never really too big a thing, or, well, where I grew up, it's just not really that popular. So the likes of Deadpool, even Iron Man before the movies came out, you know, we didn't really know who they were, but Marvel Ultimate Alliance was my introduction to a lot of these heroes. You know, today superheroes are absolutely everywhere, so they're not that special. And also the premise of an amalgamation of different heroes coming together to fight against a big bad guy. You know, we've seen that done in the Avengers now, or Suicide Squad, or there's all of these movies that we have parallels that we can draw. But back when I was a kid, I'd never really seen that. So when I sat down and launched up Marvel Ultimate Alliance on my PSP when I was younger and saw that I could be Deadpool, or I could be Spider-Man, or I could be Venom, or I could be all of these heroes, it was just a special game. So this time I went to play the PS3 versions because I don't own a PSP anymore, and the PS3 was probably the best way to play it because they did remaster these games for the PS4 and Xbox and PC, but they got delisted, I think, once Disney bought the rights, and, you know, it's up in limbo, and to buy a Steam code for them games is like hundreds upon hundreds, so it's just not worth it. So I played both Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 on PS3. So did I enjoy my time? And as we do on this channel, do they deserve a permanent place in my collection? Well, that's what this video is all about. Now, we have to talk about playing this on native hardware. Unfortunately, I don't have the CRT in the background because there's too much of a reflection. I don't have curtains, and it just doesn't look good. You won't be able to see anything, so it's not really worth it. But playing this on native hardware nowadays is pretty interesting. And it's for something that I didn't even realize was a thing. So back on the PS3, there were a couple of games that were true native 1080p. It's a very small list. And Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, even though this game came out in the early PS3 cycle, is a true 1080p game. And you know what that means? It means crisp visuals, yes, but it also means that this PS3 cannot handle running this game at 1080p whatsoever. When I launched this game up, I was filled up with nostalgia. I was so excited to have my team. And then I saw the frame rate, and this game runs like 15 or 20 FPS. And I got through the first mission, I was like, oh, maybe once I get past the first mission, which is a big helicarrier that has all of these fire effects and explosions, it might get better. But guess what? It doesn't. And I really was disappointed because I thought I would have had to give up and stop playing this game. But then, you know, as you do, I went to Google. I started Googling, why does Marvel Ultimate Alliance run so poorly on the PlayStation 3? And it turns out it's because it's a 1080p game. It just can't handle it. Now, luckily, there is a way to fix it. So if you go into the PS3's display settings, you can then click what resolution you want it to run into. And I had the option of 1080p, 1080i, 720p, and 576p. So at first, I tried it at 720p. And the game still looked pretty decent because I was playing on a 4K TV. And it ran better, but it still had loads of hitches. And then I decided, you know, let's swallow my pride. I prefer performance over fidelity in almost every single case. So I played it at 576p on a 4K TV. So some of the footage is going to be like 1080p, some of it's going to be 720p, some of it's going to be 576p, and then some of it will be direct capture of my CRT, where I did actually play a lot of this game. And on the CRT, it actually does look pretty good. There's a couple of things where you can't really see because the resolution can be quite low. And the specific borders of my CRT, you can't see certain things on the screen. So there are some issues with it, but playing it on the CRT was still a pretty good experience. And while we're on the topic of hardware, before we even talk about the game, I have to talk about the 6-axis. So for everybody that had a PS3 back in the day, the 6-axis was this amazing new technology. We have all this motion controls in our PS3 controller. What a fantastic idea. And my first experience with it was Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction, because that was a game that I got with my PlayStation 3 when I got it one Christmas. And I remember being blown away by, you know, zipping through the air or controlling the tornado launcher. But in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1, a lot of the bosses sort of have QuickTime events. And instead of, you know, doing normal QuickTime events like, you know, press X, mash square, press circle really quickly, instead you have to use the 6-axis. And I have 3 PS3 controllers, and for anybody that, you know, has an old PS3 controller, I think you realise that they're kind of a bit flimsy. They have issues where they will do phantom presses of buttons. You might squeeze the controller too hard and it would press 4 buttons, or the analog stick might be a bit ropey. That's just part of playing all games. And the PS3 controller is specifically bad for it in my eyes. Now, I do have one PS3 controller that is in the best nick of them all, so I used that, and eventually I got used to the way I want to hold the controller so that I can do the little flicks and all that, and eventually it worked. So yeah, these are just like little things that you get when you experience it on native hardware, because I assume on the PS4 version it's probably just like press X, press circle and all that. But these are just, you know, little relics of the past. And also one weird thing with the 6-axis that really confused me. So in this game, you hold L1 to dodge or you press it to roll. You know, typical stuff. But instead of using the analog stick to move, you use the 6-axis. Now, you can still use the analog stick, but the 6-axis overrides it. So, if I'm holding the 6-axis slightly towards myself, I will roll backwards. If I'm tilting it this way, I'll roll this way. So, the amount of times in this game I went to roll, and I just rolled in the complete wrong direction, and no joke, it took me about half my playthrough to even realise it. So what is Marvel Ultimate Alliance, I hear you ask, even though I can't actually hear you, and more than likely you know what it is. But Marvel Ultimate Alliance is a modern take on a beat-em-up with some RPG mechanics, so it kind of plays almost a bit like Diablo-ish, but with beat-em-up mechanics. So you have heavy, light attacks, throws, you can pick up things in the environment and throw them at people, sort of like beat-em-ups. But then where the RPG elements come in is that you have action abilities like any other Diablo or Torchlight or whatever game like that. And each character has unique abilities. Now, they're all typically of the same thing. Spider-Man has a web sling, and then Deadpool will have a gunshot, and Blade will also have a gunshot. So the characters have an AoE ability, and they have a ranged ability, and they have like a gap closer ability and stuff like that. And what I love about this game is that all the characters have multiple different moves, which is something that in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, I think they kind of ruin. Because in Ultimate Alliance 1, you could have, say, 6 or 8 different abilities, and you can mix match 4. So then you can kind of build your character a certain way. So maybe you want, I don't know, the Human Torch to be complete AoE, or you want this character to be a buffer and debuffer. And I really like that sort of extra element of RPG-ness to it. And this game is just extremely fun. Once my performance issues were sorted, you are going to so many different locations that it just feels like this massive globe-trotting adventure or dimension-trotting adventure where you're in Atlantis, and then you're in Asgard, and then you're in Doctor Strange's house, and then you're in the S.H.I.E.L.D. building, and you're just going absolutely everywhere. And it really gets that feeling of introducing you to so many different heroes and villains, like completely obscure ones that even I don't remember from when I played this. There's one guy called Arcade that is similar-ish to kind of the Joker. He hangs out at carnivals, and his level, which I believe is called Murder World, is probably the best level in the game. And that's one thing that I really want to hit home with this game and why it's so fun, is that all the levels are completely different. Not only do they look completely different, they all have unique mechanics within them that kind of separate them one from another. So you're not just going from point A to B to C, fighting a boss, and then you're done, you know? It's very unique in that sense, which is something, again, that Ultimate Alliance 2 gets wrong, which I will talk about later. And another thing that I really enjoy about this game is that, okay, you have mini bosses that are, you know, just walk around a room. You might have to like knock down their shield and they'll deal damage to them. But most of them are, you know, fairly similar, just kind of punch them until they die kind of a thing. But all like the end level bosses are completely unique, and they have these QTEs. So I actually like how they break up the pacing, because you're running through the whole level and you are just beating up enemies, picking them up, throwing them, dealing loads of damage to them, killing them, throwing them off the map, doing all these abilities, and it's just really fun. But then when you get to the bosses, you don't just want to sit there and just hammer away at a boss for 10 or 15 minutes. Instead, they give you these almost spectacle fights that have these unique mechanics. So the boss fight in Atlantis, you have to get them to break these towers, go into the tower, and then it starts the QTE, and that's how you deal damage. And then in Murder World, you have to lure the boss into the middle of the stage, jump into a cannon like, you know, what a performer would do on a stage, and launch into him, do a QTE, and then you deal damage to him. So they all stand out, and they're all really unique, because in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2 later on, all the bosses are just, you know, there might be certain things like, oh, he's charging up off this electrical pylon, you have to damage the pylon before you can damage him. But at the end of the day, all you're doing is just hammering away at them, smashing them with abilities, and then eventually they die. Now, I guess the main criticism I would level at this game is the story is cool, the fact that you're going to all of these different locations and you're being introduced to all these characters. But as somebody who isn't really into the comics, there's a lot of proper nouns thrown at you, and you're going to so many different locations that I did genuinely find it quite difficult to keep up with things. Now, do I really care that much? I don't, because this is an action RPG, but I think if you're trying to like use this as a way to properly get into the comics, I think it kind of confuses you more than anything else, because you're hearing about all these locations that are proper nouns, these items, how these heroes interact, and it's kind of very confusing as somebody who isn't a comic book fan, but open, expansive and adventurous this game is. I think it is a worthwhile trade-off to have all of these different things thrown at you, but also you get the cool, unique levels and you're introduced to loads of new heroes. So, you know, it is a criticism, but it's probably my only one. I think for both of these games, they're just fun, and I think it's perfectly shown off by how you get new costumes and new characters and stuff, because, you know, I don't want to be one of them people that's on a retro channel like, oh, everything that's new is crap, because I'm generally not really one of them. I like live service games, I buy battle passes, you know, I like skins and stuff. But it's just cool to see a game like this where in the future something like Marvel Avengers, which is, I think, sort of an iteration on this formula, is that in Marvel Avengers you are introduced to new characters, you can unlock them, you can get skins, but they're all behind microtransactions and all that sort of stuff. But in a game like this, you unlock characters by finding these statues in the world to unlock Black Panther and Daredevil, even though they're really hard to find, especially playing 576p on a 4K TV. But you know, they're there to find, there's like secrets to find, there's costumes to find. And one thing that I really like is that you find Blade in this game and you unlock him. But how you unlock Blade is not like, oh, get to level 10 and you'll unlock him, or find all of these things. Instead, in Murder World, there is a random claw machine, and once you go up to that claw machine and interact with it and do it, Blade pops out of it, and you're like, oh crap, what am I doing here? And then he just joins your team, and then you have Blade. I don't know, there's just something so cool about that. It's almost of a bygone era of something that we realistically probably will never experience in a like mainstream way ever again, because everything can be monetized and everything will be monetized. So, you know, that is a cool part about this game.
Alright, that should do it. Won't be any Latverian air support bothering us on our way to Castle Doom now. We'll take it on foot and bring in Bravo team once we hit checkpoint 3.
On foot? You're kidding, right? Do you have any idea how little arch support I get in this outfit?
Put a sock in it, webhead.
Oh, socks make it worse, actually.
Alright, ladies, let's move, now!
So of course that brings us onto Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, which came out only a couple of years after it. Now the first game was developed by Raven, who made a couple of great games like Singularity. It's a game I've never played, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it. But then Raven got sucked into the Call of Duty machine, and they got gobbled up as every single Activision developer does, and now they're working on Call of Duty games. And then Vicarious Visions made Ultimate Alliance 2, which they're just one of my favorite studios. They make all the GBA Crash games. They made the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. They made Crash Insane Trilogy. So they're just a brilliant studio, but guess what? They got gobbled up, and now they're part of the Call of Duty machine, because everybody that goes to Activision gets gobbled up into the Call of Duty machine. Or, if you're the likes of Toys for Bob, they got out and now they're making their own stuff. And right off the bat, this game runs way better than Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1. So, not only does it look better, it feels better, it runs better. So from that aspect, I much prefer Ultimate Alliance 2 over 1. Now that is the only real part of Ultimate Alliance 2 that I prefer, because there's just something about the feel of this game where you can do combos and then string action abilities, and it just feels smoother than the original. Dodging feels smoother than the original. Jumping feels smoother than the original. I think they really honed in on that feel of making this game feel fun and engaging and responsive, whereas I think Ultimate Alliance 1 doesn't feel as responsive. Obviously, it's the first of its kind. It's also, you know, runs really badly on the PS3, so that will obviously be having an effect too. So Ultimate Alliance 2 is less of an RPG, which is where everything sort of falls apart. Now, not falls apart, because I did beat this game in like a day and a half, and I absolutely adored my time with it. But it's less of an RPG, the locations are nowhere near as varied. The story is easier to follow, but that's because I believe the sort of MCU kind of started to creep in a very small bit. So one thing I want to point out about both of these games that I really enjoy is that when it comes to the writing, the characters are their characters. Spider-Man and Deadpool are funny and they're constantly making jokes. Thor is serious because, you know, he is a Norse god. Captain America is also serious because, you know, he's from the 1940s. Tony Stark is still kind of snarky, but, you know, Everything isn't a joke the way it is in the MCU now. That's my biggest complaint of the MCU, because I've just given up on it. But all of the characters just need to joke. It's like, why is Thor making jokes? He is the god. He is a Norse god. He should not be making jokes. You know, them sort of things annoy me with the MCU. And here, in both of these games, the writing is great in that sense. There's no... Spider-Man makes jokes, yes, but all the other characters don't. It just makes it stand out even more because, you know, we are in the MCU times where everything is a joke, and I just love it from that aspect. But where the MCU kind of starts to creep in here, or the beginnings of it, is that they're going for a bit more of a almost like realistic tone. This game is less comic booky and it's more movie. So the character dimensions are, you know, slightly more human-like. They're all roughly the same sort of shape, so they all look like humans. But the locations in this game are just completely bland and boring. It's like you're in a helicarrier, or you're in this nondescript sort of factory, or you're in this nondescript warehouse, or you're in this nondescript rooftop of a random city, you know? And I think that's where the game really falters in comparison to 1. Whereas in 1, you're going to Atlantis, or you're going here, or instead you're like, oh, I'm traveling on the rooftops of a building, this is fun, or I'm going to this lab that looks like the other lab that I was in 2 levels ago, and it's the only unique location is Wakanda, which is sort of the end of the game. And I kind of wish there was more unique locations that stood out. I touched on this later. When it comes to the sort of boss fights, there's no real QTEs. There's nothing really unique about them. Obviously, they have, you know, different move sets and all that. But I think when you're going through a whole level and you are beating up on hundreds of enemies, and then you're getting to a boss and all you're doing is beating up on that boss again, it kind of gets a bit stale. That's why I actually really like the way they were done in Ultimate Alliance 1 as in comparison to 2. And also, like, it's just not as much of an RPG. You still have the fact that you can level up your characters, you can put points into different abilities, into different passives, into different actives, and things like that. But each character only has 4 different abilities. Like, I built Ghost Rider in Ultimate Alliance 1 into this almost like buffer, debuffer character, whereas in here you kind of have to just stick to the same ability, so it does get a bit samey. It's still really fun. This game is a lot shorter than the first one. I think the first one I put like 15, 16 hours in, and for this one it's probably more like 8 or 9, so it's like almost half the size of the game. So I think if this was the length of the first one without having all those sort of RPG mechanics, I think I probably would have sort of started to lose interest in it. I'd still probably would have beaten it, but you know, it wouldn't have kept my interest the same way number 1 did. I think if you combined elements of 1 and 2, you could make like a near perfect Ultimate Alliance game. If you had the feel and combos and performance of 2 and put it into 1 in the same universe, same levels, same heroes, with the more RPG mechanics of 1 and the more interesting, well, slightly confusing, but more interesting and comic booky story, I think it would have just been perfect. Regardless, I still enjoyed my time playing both of these games. I loved them. I've absolutely binged them over the past like 4 or 5 days. They're just fantastic. I had so much fun with them, and that's one thing I want to touch on in this video, is that I was talking to Jake, my friend Jake, about this, who has his own YouTube channel, and we were discussing how I think we've almost cracked it, you know, where I'm playing a load of old games this year, but I'm also playing some new games, and I don't really feel like I'm missing out. Like the past however long, I've played a couple of the old Souls games, I've played Daxter, I've played Size Matters, I've played Star Wars Bounty Hunter, now I've played Ultimate Alliance, and then I'll probably move on and play another game for this channel, like, I don't know, Ratchet and Clank or something. And I just really like this balance of new and old, and I can experience in all these old games again. And yeah, Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 are amazing games. I think I prefer Ultimate Alliance 1 overall, but I still think if you took some elements from 2 and combined it with 1, you would have made an absolutely amazing game. Both of these games are going to stay in my collection because I just had a fantastic time playing them. They're really cheap. I think I paid €22 for Ultimate Alliance 1 and €20 for Ultimate Alliance 2. So €42 for these two. Amazing, amazing fun games. I had a great time. So on my last video, I played Star Wars Bounty Hunter. So go check out that video. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. See you all next video. Goodbye.